Hey there, it's Red. Welcome back to the garden. Today we're going to tackle a project I've been thinking of doing for the last few months and I am so excited to get it done. We're going to completely revamp this wheelbarrow planter that we have as a centerpiece in our backyard. The initial planting of the wheelbarrow was from a pallet of succulents that my sister gave to me when she was moving out of town. I kept the pallet alive for a while, but it was kind of awkward in the space that I had at the time, so I decided to break it down and put a lot of it into this wheelbarrow, and the rest of it I put into a mini pallet planter that I still have to this day. It's actually leaning against the blue door if you watched my garden tour video a couple weeks ago. It did well for a while, but it's not really doing that good anymore, so I want to give it a good refresh with some new soil and some new plants to give it some new life. So I went down to the nursery this morning just to get a couple of red succulents to fill in the gap because I knew I had a lot of green and blue succulents on hand. And of course, when I got there, I went all out. I got all these plants. I honestly spent way too much money on this given how many succulents I have around the yard. I accomplished the goal of getting the red ones like I wanted to, but I also got some pretty cool low-lying ones that I've never seen before that I think will be a great addition to this arrangement. Alright, let's get into it. As you can see, so many of the succulents are super leggy, very dry, kind of mismatched. There's things that are growing tall next to things that are growing short. It's just not blending well at all. There really wasn't much intention when I first planted this besides saving the succulents. So I'm going through and cutting out any of the dead stuff, saving any of the cuttings of the leggy ones to replant, and kind of just assessing what needs to be done throughout. Initially, I thought I could save a lot of these and not have to dig up the whole planter, but as I was getting into it, I realized the soil was super dry, and that's because I used a really pumice stone heavy soil mix, like a cactus mix, thinking that's what it need. But since the wheelbarrow is so shallow, it does not retain moisture in the summer. Even though I would dump water on this for the last few months, it never really got saturated. So I decided that I was going to go through and rip pretty much everything out and then replace the soil with more of like a potting mix and a raised bed mix combination that I use a lot in potted plants. The only things that I'll end up leaving here is the agave in the bottom left and then the aloe plants. Everything else I'm going to rip out and replant. As I was tearing this planter apart, I noticed a praying mantis on the agave. I'm super excited. This is the first one I've seen in the yard, so I hope there's more of them and I hope they continue to come season after season. I'll try my best to not disturb him while we do the rest of the arrangement. Let's leave him be and I'll speed up the video a little bit as we get all the old plants out and the new soil in, and I'll meet you guys back when we start to place the new succulents to get them planted. Alright, now with most of the soil gone, you can see really how shallow this wheelbarrow is. It probably only has a depth of soil of about 5 or 6 inches, and it gets really shallow over by the agave side. I did leave a lot of the soil under the agave and the aloe just because the root systems are really robust. I will add a top dressing of soil onto that side. So like I said before, I'm going to use a mixture of potting soil and raised bed mix to get a little bit of peat moss, organic material, and something that just holds more water than cactus soil does, because even though succulents can survive with little water, they'll thrive with adequate water. As we start the planting process, I find that it's best to place everything where you want to plant it before you start planting things. Even if you know you want to put one plant in a certain spot, it's still good to place everything in the pots and then take a step back and get a view of what your end product is going to be. It's so much easier to do this and move things around like I'm doing here than it is to Plant something and dig it up and plant something and dig it up. A little bit of preparation will go a long way, especially with such a tight arrangement that is so full of plants like we have here. I start with potted plants that already have root balls formed because they're going to take up the most space, and then I'll go through and I'll fill in the gaps with cuttings from the wheelbarrow, cuttings from other plants around the yard, and the other plants that I pulled out of the wheelbarrow initially and that don't quite have the root ball full of dirt but they still have roots on them. My overall idea for this arrangement is to have the highest points be around the cement face, the agave, and the aloes already in there, and have everything kind of taper down to the sides with some trailing succulents that will go over the side of the wheelbarrow and hang off and create a nice little soft look as they sway in the wind. And front and center, you can see the 2 red succulents that I bought from the store this morning. I really like the contrast they have to all the other colors. Now, I was having a really hard time placing this other tall succulent, but I think it'll do good in the back there next to the aloe. So there's some of the trailing succulents in the front. They were growing there already before, but I think they will do much better with the soil and they won't be as dead looking. They'll be more green and vibrant. With the majority of the plants placed, I want to add in some rocks that'll break up the flow of the plants and create little eye-catching pieces throughout the arrangement. The only thing left to do now is to start digging holes and planting plants. Now, from my experience, I found it's easiest to start planting in the middle and then work your way out. Because of how dense this arrangement is going to be, I don't have to worry too much about tamping the soil around each root ball. That'll kind of come into play as I plant everything and it becomes tighter and tighter. And then once I water at the very end, the soil will settle and I'll see where I need to add additional soil to little spots here and there, so that way it all has enough soil to grow roots and doesn't have air pockets around it. You'll see here very quickly that all the work we did to lay everything out is about to get really messed up, but that's okay. I have the general layout in my head. I just need to move things around to make it easier to plant and to not disrupt things and to not break leaves off of plants. I kept catching myself picking up the rocks and changing which side was going to be on the surface. Notice the way I'm turning the rock around in my hand? That's the thought process I'm going through when I place each and every plant in this wheelbarrow. Even though we all know once these things start growing in and some things die, it's really not going to matter. I'm going to have to come in here in a few months and replant and trim. Alright, with the planting started and the basics covered, I'm going to speed up the video a little bit here so we can get this whole wheelbarrow planted. Alright, now that everything with the root ball is in the ground, it's time to start filling in the gaps with cuttings. So this red and yellow sedum succulent that I'm cutting apart right here, if you notice, did have a root ball, but it was pretty leggy, so I planted the root ball hoping that it'll regenerate new growth. cut off the leggy stuff and then replanting it on top to give it a nice tight little look, and I'm also supplementing it with more of these cuttings that I had from throughout the yard. This variety of sedum was one of the first succulents that I considered to be my favorite. Back when I was a little kid, we had it growing in our yard at home, but for some reason for the last few years, every plant that I've had of it has just died. I don't know why, but I'm so happy that I was able to find some at the nursery to replace my stock of it and hopefully get it to keep growing so I can keep adding it to other arrangements. And just like that, it's time to speed up the video again so we can get the rest of the cuttings placed throughout the arrangement. So with most of the cuttings planted, it's time just to do a little switch up here with the Aeoniums and put in some Echeverias instead. I thought about it, and the Aeoniums were going to grow way too tall to be in this little area, so I want to keep something that's low growing that has a nice bloom on it. I really wish I would have counted, but I probably planted close to 100 individual plants and cuttings throughout this whole wheelbarrow, which is crazy to think because it's only about 3 feet long and 1.5 feet wide. All we have left to do now is to clean up the dirt out of the tops of the plants and give it a good watering. I'll start by using my leaf blower to get rid of most of the dirt. This leaf blower has a variable setting on it, so I can lightly touch the trigger to have a little bit of air come out, or fully pull the trigger to have it blow full blast. And then with the hose, I'll start with the mist setting to get any really fine dust off of the plants, and then I'll switch it over to a shower setting to blast any of that soil that's left down to the base of the plant. With everything all squeaky clean, the last thing to do is give it a good watering. Right now it's about 80 degrees where I live throughout the day, so these things are going to have to be saturated for the next few days while the roots get established. And don't worry, I didn't forget about our praying mantis friend. Throughout the whole planting, I kept checking to make sure that he was okay, and look at him now. He was just basking in the wet leaves of the agave, and again, I really hope he sticks around for the season. I moved the umbrella that was covering the workstation as I was planting throughout the afternoon, but now we can really see how the succulents are just basking in the sunlight, and I think it's going to do so well here. Thank you everybody for hanging out while I replanted this wheelbarrow planter. As we all know, the yard work never ends, so please subscribe to follow me along this gardening journey.